Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Susie and I will be reading the land acknowledgement today. We honor the original people, the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. We recognize that Grand Rapids Community College is located on the land ceded to the United States in the Chicago Treaty of 1821. We also recognize the Grand River Bands of Ottawa Indians as the descendants of original tribes presented at the treaty's signing. We express our gratitude to the original peoples past, present, and future who have stewarded this land for generations. We understand this acknowledgement must be coupled with a relationship of advocacy and support for Indigenous peoples. We recognize our responsibility to continuously uphold our commitments towards Indigenous communities. This land acknowledgement recognizes the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples and affirms their history and our efforts to be accountable to their needs. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Good evening. Warm welcome. Pretty soon I'll have to say chill welcome because the sun is shining, and we love that. So my name is Jamelia Hardley, and I am excited to welcome you all both online and in person to our second to last diversity lecture series session tonight. So on behalf of the Woodrick Center for Inclusion and Multicultural Affairs, we welcome you and to tonight's Women's History keynote, and we're excited to have tonight's session. On behalf of Grand Rapids Community College's Diversity Lecture Series, it's dedicated to fostering meaningful conversations on intersecting identities, equity, and social change. In honor of Women's History Month, this session features Mandice McAllister as an inclusion and retention expert who will explore the dynamics of power, belonging, and system of influence. In the spirit of Women's History Month, a social change and community, I want to set tonight's tone with a historical fact. Ethel B. Coe was a trailblazing activist, singer, actress, and humanitarian in Grand Rapids. She made history as the first Black woman to run for public office in the city, paving the way for future generations of Black women in leadership. Known for her dedication to civil rights and the arts, Coe used her voice both literally and figuratively to advocate for equity, representation, and community empowerment. Her legacy continues to inspire change makers even still today. So it is our hope that tonight's speaker embodies those same principles, which I know she will. Through the lens of her work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, McAllister will invite attendees to reflect on how systems shape shape access and opportunities, and the importance of strategic ways to advocate for meaningful change. She will also highlight the core concepts of examining barriers that prevent full participation in spaces of power and influence. Now I have a couple of logistical items before we go ahead and get our tonight's session introduce our speaker. First and foremost, I want to thank a few folks who have helped make tonight's event possible. Our sponsor this year has been Steelcase, our provost office, Transfer to Bridges, our media and tech support team, our interpreters for tonight, our diversity lecture series planning team, and of course you all for joining us this evening. There will be a brief Q&A session at the end of the presentation. There will be a QR code that will be presented on the screen for folks to be able to submit any questions or things that they would like us to make sure that their voice is represented in the room. As far as participation goes, please make sure that you let us know if you're in person. If you have a question, we'll be sure to give you the mic so that you can ask your question as well. Lastly, there will be a feedback survey at the end of the presentation. Please take a moment to fill that out. Your feedback and your voice is very helpful and critical as we plan future events like this. And your voice is very much so appreciated, and we're grateful for it. Also, please be sure to check out the Woodruff Center's website and social media platforms to stay tuned on what we're doing next. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I have the honor of introducing our speaker, so I'm going to read her bio. So Mandice McAllister is the Inclusion and Retention Manager for Warner Norcross Judd LLP, a leading law firm with over 230 attorneys and 9 offices throughout Michigan. Within her role, she provides strategic leadership for the firm's internal and external DEI-related programs and processes, helping to create and sustain a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. She earned her Bachelors of Arts in Political Science from The Ohio State University. Mandice was 2023 Crain's Grand Rapids 40 Under 40 honoree, a 2021 finalist for DEI Champion of the Year at the Epic Awards for the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce, and was honored as a 2022 Diversity Business Leader by Corp magazine. She serves as a board member for the Comprehensive Therapy Center, Arbor Circle, and the Greater Michigan chapter of the National Black MBA Association. Join me in welcoming Mandice McAllister.
Oh, thank you all. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Alive, right. You know what? Speaking of, I need to start by acknowledging the fact that, like most of West Michigan, I am getting over a cold. So you can probably hear that my voice is giving congested Kermit Frog. Kermit the Frog, I might cough. In fact, I probably will cough. I've got tea. I got a pocket full of cough drops, but the show must go on in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm going to do the best that I can, and y'all will bear with me. So thank you to the team at GRCC. I'm so glad to be able to share space with you this evening. I've been watching the diversity lecture series as it has gone on. You've hosted some colleagues that I deeply respect and admire, Dr. Shaq Anthony and Ovell Barbie, and so I'm really honored to be able to present to you this evening and talking about belonging and power. So you all have read my bio. You know I'm the Inclusion and Retention Manager at Warner Norcross Judd, which is a law firm headquartered here in Grand Rapids. My office is here in the Grand Rapids office. That being said, none of the opinions that I'm going to express today are reflective of my wonderful employer. I'm here today as just Mandice. And so that being said, one of my most important jobs is mom to Eric II and to Nathan, and the wife of Big Eric, or Eric Sr., as we call him. And I also serve on the board of several nonprofits here in Grand Rapids. One of the boards that I serve on, Comprehensive Therapy Center, is actually having their legacy gala right now. So I'm going to leave here and maybe see if I can go over there and hook up with them. So best wishes on a great event, CTC. So this is not really a lecture. I'm sorry for not, following directions. I really want this to be a conversation with all of us. And what I've tried to do is put together in a flow that makes sense a way for us to converse together and go through some of the things that have been top of mind and top of heart for me in the past couple of months as we're navigating some really new spaces in this work. But I do have a roadmap, so this is where we're headed. We're going to start with a discussion of what it looks like to be the lonely only. We're going to talk about DEI and we're going to define it. We're going to talk about a framework for belonging. We're going to talk about systems and power. But that being said, I really hope that you all will talk to me throughout this. I know we're going to have Q&A, official Q&A at the end of this session. But feel free to answer questions or ask questions in real time, to ask for clarification, to share your own expertise, your own lived experiences in real time in this space, because I would love that. And of course, this is not a lecture or a training. I do many of those. This is a conversation, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give you some things to walk away with, some things for you to continue to think about and to take back to your organizations. So I'd like for you to understand how systems and power operate. I'd like for you to walk away with maybe a new framework for yourself. It doesn't have to be mine and how I'm thinking about belonging these days, but your own framework for how belonging works and what it means to you. to identify your spheres of influence, and then, of course, to walk away with some of those strategies for how to leverage your own power, whether that's in your organizations or your institutions or other places that you are in community. How does that sound? Sound good? Okay, cool. So let's start here. One of my most vivid moments of identity salience, and that is just those moments where aspects of your personal identity just really come to the forefront, where they're just super tangible to you, is when I went away to college. So this picture here is a picture of me when I graduated from East Kentwood High School, go Falcons. And then this picture on the bottom here is me in my first quarter at The Ohio State University. We had quarters back then, not semesters. And so when I went away to school, you know, we navigated, my family and I, the very organized chaos that was freshmen move in. Freshmen back in those days, child, this was a long time ago. I don't know if it's still like this. But we moved in 2 weeks before classes, and freshmen moved in 1 whole week before everyone else moved into the campus, just to give us time to acclimate. And so my family and I went down to Columbus. We went through the process. They moved me into my dorm, and I waved goodbye. And it would be a whole week until I saw another black girl on campus. 1 whole week. So there were black people in my dorm, right? So there was 2 guys down the hall from me. There was 2 upstairs. So if you're counting, that's 5 of us in our dormitory. This is no shade to The Ohio State University. There's probably many reasons for this. The size of my residence hall where I lived on campus. But nonetheless, I really did feel like the lonely only in those 2 weeks, right? In fact, fun story, the first black girl that I did see on campus, her name is Jessica. We're still friends to this day, and she was in my wedding. Now, I went to a pretty diverse high school, but I grew up in West Michigan. So it was not the first time that I had ever been in a room where I was the only black girl or one of few. Has anybody ever had that experience? You walk in a room and it's like, ooh, there's not many of us in here. And whatever us means to you, right? So it wasn't that it was new, but I had always had the opportunity or the safety net of going home to my family, of being in community. I had my church family. I had my wonderful family at home. And in those 2 weeks, I just felt so unmoored and so unanchored. And literally every single day for those 2 weeks, I wanted to go home. I wanted to go home. Luckily, I didn't, right? I did graduate. I stayed, and I found my community. These pictures are of me with my colleagues as resident advisors in Morrill Tower. And then this is a picture of me as a member of AAV, African American Voices Gospel Choir. And so I did find my community. I had a good, after them 2 weeks, I had a great time. I don't want you to feel too bad for me. I loved college. But those first 2 weeks and really that moment in my life really shaped how I navigate space, how I show up, how I build community, and ultimately how I learn to advocate for myself and for others. All right, so let's address the elephant in the room. We are in a moment of pretty heightened backlash, negativity, opposition, lots of different words as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I'm sure that you've seen these headlines or similar headlines. There have been accusations of reverse discrimination. There have been very public, high-profile individuals, including our own sitting president, right, our current sitting president, that have been vocally against diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Why? Why is that happening? I have my own theories, but I believe that any time that there is moments of progress and forward movement, that there inevitably will come a pushback to that progress. And we've seen it as a cyclical reoccurrence in history. So you have Reconstruction, and then you have the rise of the KKK and terror, right? I really think that it's important that as we continue the conversation that we're going to have this evening, that we keep this in the back of our mind, not just the backlash and the heightened scrutiny and the maze that a lot of us are having to navigate as new executive orders come out, but how do we, in the face of opposition, continue to move the work forward? So I want us to be thinking about that. Any other thoughts before we move from this slide? I just want to make some space for folks to share. Don't be shy. Okay. So when we say diversity, equity, and inclusion, what do we mean? And honestly, sometimes when people are expressing anti-DEI sentiments, I sit and think to myself, like, do you know what you're against? Do you know what this thing is that you're adamantly opposing? And so there are multiple ways that we can define this. This is how I like to define it. And it's in terms of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve when we do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So when we say that we're trying to achieve diversity, or we're aspiring to have diversity, we're talking about a workforce or a student body that the composition is representative across identity, across the many identities that we see in the world, right? That's reflected in our organization, in our institution, and in our student body. When we're saying that we're trying to achieve equity, what we're saying is that we're trying to achieve an experience, whether that's with our students or with our workforce, where there is access to opportunity, where there is well-being, and where there is the absence of discrimination, mistreatment, abuse, or harm, which is literally the substance of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Like it literally says this, like not word for word. This is Mandice's slide, but that's the gist of it, right? Ooh, I laughed and I brought up a cough. So when we say that we're trying to achieve the outcome of inclusion, what do we mean? It means that we're trying to achieve an environment that is respectful and accountable. And those two things are important, right? Because we're establishing norms of respect and we're holding ourselves accountable when those norms are deviated from, right? So those two things are important. And so you may have heard the expression that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And so that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion really tries to bridge, that gap between what we're aspiring to and the reality that we might see. We're creating bridges. But can I be real for a second? Just when one of my biggest, I don't know, what do the kids say? Icks, my biggest ick or pet peeve or my cringe or whatever is when I hear well-intentioned, kind-hearted, just devoted people describing the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in their organization using this sentence. We want our organization to be welcoming to everyone. It's like, man, how could you have a problem with that? Doesn't that sound so lovely? It does. It really does. But I like to use this analogy, and some of y'all who've heard me talk before may have heard me use this. So let's say I welcome you all into my home. I invite you over for dinner. I'm going to greet you at the door. I'm going to tell you to come in and have a seat, right? I'm going to show you where the bathrooms are. I'm probably going to whip up some food, maybe. I'm going to give you something to drink. And then inevitably what? Baby, you don't got to go home, right? But at some point, I'm going to be like, you got to get up out of here. I'm going to hit you with one of those. So what you doing? What you got going on for the rest of the night? Because you've got to leave here. So when we use that word, when we say we want our workplaces, our institutions to be welcoming to everyone, what that language implies, and I will admit it, it's not, it's implicit, is that there is a host and there is a guest. And what we are doing is welcoming people into a space that we hold the power in. It's not acknowledging the structure of that place and that some of the folks that we're welcoming in should have had access all along and they were barred from access. It's not taking account for the fact that some folks cannot be welcomed into a space just as it is. Sometimes you got to change some things in here for me to be welcome, for me to have access, for me to thrive in that space, right? So let's take this analogy a little bit further. My husband and my children are not welcome in my home. They live there. They live there. They belong there. My dad, too. It's like his second home. He lives there. If my husband comes in and he says, "Ooh, boo, it's cold in here," and he starts tapping on that thermostat to raise the temperature up, he has every right to do so. He pays the cost to be the boss. This is his home, right? If somebody's a guest in your home and they start changing stuff, let me move this over here. I don't like the way this armchair is sitting. Excuse me, what? Don't move stuff around in here. If my children come to me and they say, "Mom, you know what? I really want my toy box over here instead, and I want to move my bed over here." I love it. Go for it. Make the space your own because you live here. This is your space. And so what I'm really keenly feeling is that we need to go a step beyond in our organizations from welcoming folks to co-creating spaces that are for everyone, where we are dismantling barriers, where we're acknowledging the barriers that were erected before, and where we're really making systemic change so that people can come into a space and really thrive there. Does that make sense? Okay. And so DEI practitioners and HR professionals and researchers have really been extolling for a while the virtues of belonging. I just used it. My husband and our children, they belong in our house, right? And we've been talking about the fact that belonging, is good for engagement. It increases job satisfaction. It really boosts your bottom line. And belonging speaks to the ability of an individual to come into a space to be accepted, to feel like they belong, to find community, to feel as though their voice is heard, to feel as though they're appreciated for the work that they're doing in their organization. And lately, I've been asking myself, is that enough? Is it enough? Is that what I want? Do I want to belong in the space? Do I want to feel accepted? Do I want to find community? Like, yes, right? And so for me, I've been thinking about what does it look like for me personally? Again, I'm Mandice, not the inclusion and retention manager at Warner, right? What does it look like for me, and for those that I'm in community with to go from acceptance to agency? From fitting in to taking up space. That's different. You fit in, it's like, yeah, come on, have a seat. You take up space, no, move over. Move over, right? Or I'm bringing my own table, right? I want to pause here. How is this feeling to you? Are there any thoughts in the room? What does belonging look like and feel like for you? What does it mean for that to be enough or to be tangible for you in the spaces that you're in? Yes. Also, hello, cuz. That's literally my first cousin. Yeah. Hmm. Absolutely. I love that. Anybody else? What does it look like? What does belonging look like or feel like? What are you thinking about that you need in the spaces that you occupy? Well, I'll take a sip of water. Soda? Okay. Absolutely. 100%. Yes. Mm. Oh, shoot. Sorry, friends online.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Yes, so what I was saying is the impact of our journeys and where we are and how the space that we take up or the spaces that we occupy, how that may adapt to us to be able to continue to grow, progress, develop as into who we are and who we want to be, but then also aiding into that journey as well, helping,
Yes.
pouring into you, seeing you, hearing you, and giving you opportunity to be exactly what you want to be and having those conversations.
Absolutely. This is so good.
Anybody else
Anybody
as I
else?
now walk the room?
Sorry. I know we're not at that point yet. I want to talk to you all. It's not as fun when there's no talking.
I just kind of wanted to go back to that analogy of like welcoming people into your home, right? Like a guest doesn't pay bills, they don't clean up, they don't do chores, like they don't have to put any work in, right?
That's true.
People who actually live there, like they have to put in the work. They have to like, if you have roommates, like you have to be considerate of each other. So I think that's a really impactful analogy to have as well, because DEI work is like everybody's work, right?
Yes.
And is
Yes.
being able to put in that work and knowing that you're part of something greater than you, not just, oh, I'm just a guest here.
I love that. You said a lot. And the church said amen.
Just about acceptance and fitting in. I just want to add, like, I am the type of person that like really listens, or at least I try to really listen. So, I don't gatekeep anything. If I hear a student struggling with something or they're confiding in me, and I know that there's resources out there to help them, I'm like, I'm just the type of person, like, I'm gonna give you everything that I know. So yeah, you could be like less stressed, focus on what you need to focus, whatever it is that that person's having, and I'm like, so just yeah, I guess not be a gatekeeper.
Yes.
Yeah, I like to share.
We'll get into that in a few more slides too. That's so important, the resource sharing and helping folks to navigate the systems. Thank you all for talking back. So we'll kind of wrap up this section here to just drive home the point that really when we're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, rather than just making folks feel welcome, right, we should be asking, questions like these. This is not exhaustive, but things like this. Who has historically been excluded from our space and why, right? What barriers exist that prevent full participation and belonging? And then the final one, which to me is most salient for me right now, right? How are we shifting systems and power to ensure not only just true inclusion, but true equity, true access, right? How are we doing those things? So if we're shifting systems and power, what do we mean by that? What do we mean when we say a system? In this context, we're talking about the very broad and interconnected policies, which are, concrete laws, rules, guidelines that govern an institution or an organization. We're also talking about informal practices, ways of doing things. Have you ever trained someone and you like, I'm going to show you how you're supposed to do this, and then I'm going to show you how I do it, right? You're giving them the policy, and then you're giving them the practice. So systems encompass structure, which is how an organization is organized. It also encompasses the strategy, which is how resources are allocated for that organization, for that entity to achieve its mission. And it also encompasses culture, which are the things that we believe and that we value in our organizations or in our institutions. And so the word systemic is always the boogeyman, right? And we say things like systemic racism or systemic sexism. What we're really meaning is practices or policies that are embedded into these systems that produce the outcomes of isms or inequality. So what does it mean when we're implementing interventions, which is what we do in DEI work, that are going to help us achieve the outcomes of diversity, equity, and inclusion? It could look like creating a policy with the supporting practices that are going to change the job performance evaluation process that make it more fair. Then by virtue of doing that, we're going to increase the representation of racial or ethnic or gender diversity at the leadership level. That's a systemic intervention. We could be talking about changing pay equity policies, right? And you should be looking at that. We could be looking at changing the implicit cultural narratives in our organizations that can devalue characteristics or ways of talking that are associated with certain cultures, hairstyles, standards of professionalism that might disadvantage one culture over the other. We could be looking at changing policies that disadvantage disabled workers in the workplace to the advantage of non-disabled folks. And we literally saw that in the pandemic, right? We heard from our disabled siblings that said, yes, remote work gives me greater access into the workforce. And now we're just rolling it all back. Those were systemic changes that increase the diversity, equity, and inclusion in our spaces. So that's what we mean when we say systemic. And this is different than individual acts, although individual actors do act within systems and they exert power, which is where we're going next. So what do we mean when we say power? This, again, is not exhaustive. These are some of the ways that power can be exerted within systems, within our organizations. The first one is the one that we think of most commonly, which is positional power. It's what's granted to you by virtue of the position that you hold or the title that you hold in your organization. You're the CEO, you do what you want, right? You're the boss. It's also relational power. A good friend of mine framed it to me this way a couple of years ago, which is a common phrase. It's not what you know, it's who you know, and also who knows you. It's very important because you can know a lot of people that don't know that you exist, right? And that won't speak your names in rooms where you're not. There's expert power, which comes by virtue of you having an extensive skill set or being able to exert a level of expertise or knowledge or skill in a certain area. There's coercive power, which is your ability to force a certain behavior or an outcome. The very opposite of that is reward power, your ability to incentivize the behavior or the outcomes that you want. And then finally, there's referent power, which is influenced through, my mom is calling me. Referent power is influenced through respect, admiration, or someone's identification with you. They admire you so much that they're going to see you as a leader and they're going to follow you. So these are some of the way that power can operate within those systems. Again, systems are deciding who gets access. And to a certain extent, power is operating within those systems to do the very same thing. So this is I love this quote from Alex Walker, which says, the most common way that people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. That being said, let's have a little chat, right? I want to hear from you again. Two things, and you can answer either one of these questions, but how have you seen power operate? And we can go back to the previous slide if that makes it easier. And then, what kind of power do you have? And it doesn't have to be one of these, but bonus points if it is. What kind of power do you have? Or how have you seen power work?
So, one power that we hold is the power of being an expert at in whatever space we fill. A lot of times people get frustrated or upset when people ask them questions, about your hair, about your holidays or whatever. And it's like, they go Google it, go Google it. But why should they go Google it when they have an expert standing right in front of them? I know it's hard to keep answering questions all the time, but it's like, you're the expert. Where else should I go to get this information? I could go to Google,
Yeah.
but Google could lie to me.
Yeah.
Wikipedia is full of lies.
Yeah.
They're unreliable. I am a reliable source. So if somebody wants to ask me a question about me and what I've been through, I need to be graceful enough to give them some kind of answer, because I'm the perfect source. And that's the power that I have to change somebody's opinion or just even frame of reference, how they see things.
And you're building community by doing that as well. What else? What power do you have?
One of the powers that we have that's not listed up there is simple, but we have the power of our voice in advocating for ourselves and others.
Yeah.
You can advocate for yourself, which is great, standing up and finding the right words to be able to say, hey, I did not like this, or standing up for others, because we've all heard of stories where people are in meetings, somebody has said something that is wild and off the wall, and then they wait until after to say, hey, I didn't agree with that, or they were wrong. You should have said that when everybody was in the room.
Yeah.
Don't wait until everybody leaves, because now when I was isolated in that moment and felt alone, now you're giving me what I needed in that moment when you should have corrected it.
Yeah.
It was loud and wrong the first time, and you should have used your power and influence in that moment to say, let's not do that. Let's pivot and do something else, or you're completely wrong. But
Yeah.
we have to be able to advocate for those who are marginalized or those who don't believe that they have a voice and have power. Because if you're able to influence, or if you're able and you have that respect, authority, or admiration, use your influence. Don't
Absolutely.
harvest it for evil. Don't hold it for yourself, but make sure that you're being a pathway for someone else who does not have that, or the courage. And I guess another tool is courage that we can use as well.
I love it. You were right there.
I actually want to piggyback off of what she just said. I really like that. So I'm an HR practitioner, and when I think of power and how I've seen it used, I've seen all of these. But relational is one that kind of one that I'm struggling with right now in our current climate. It's who you know and who knows you.
Yeah.
And as much as it pains me to say, especially in my profession, it very much is a who you know, and that relationship there. And, the current climate is, we want things based off merit. That's the justification of rolling back DEI efforts. And we all, especially us in underrepresented groups, know better.
Yeah.
And so if you are a person who has a voice or the courage, as this young lady stated, that's definitely something that we will need, in this time for those who don't have those relationships. Because we'll definitely see all the efforts that have been made in the past, 4 to 5 years just be erased.
Absolutely. When I was practicing this presentation with a colleague of mine, she said, hey, so isn't nepotism just a form of relational power? And I was like, yeah, I guess it kind of is. Not really one. I don't like that version of it, though, right? I'm okay with you, having relationships with, your colleagues, and then, that might open doors. But yeah, that nepotism is one that grates a little bit. And sometimes I want to explore, why it does. But yeah.
When that question came up, the first thing I thought of was I don't know what kind of power I have. And then just listening, it kind of, hit me that the power to learn, the power to adapt and correct mistakes should they occur, through self-reflection and listening, is a pretty powerful power.
Absolutely.
Or it can be, and it should be. And so only if we obviously use it, So I think that's something I'm gonna take at least for the duration of the lecture, I
Yeah.
suppose. Yeah.
I love that. Anybody else want to talk about how you've seen power operate, what types of power that you hold? Are there one of these that is more important than the other? I definitely think that positional power is, again, it's the most common one. I think it's an easy one to, once you have attained positional power, right, to lean on or to fall back on. But I think you'd have a really hard time being a good leader if you're just relying on positional power and you're not tapping into some of these other, maybe not coercive, don't tap into that, but the relational power, the reward power. Oh, go ahead, Salva.
I think the best superpower would be relational.
Okay.
Because even if you are in a position of authority and you don't know those who, I will say, who you're serving under you and who you're leading, then you're missing the point of being a leader.
Yeah.
And then the opposite, if you're trying to grow, you need to have people around you who will speak your name into rooms that you're not in, who will advocate on your behalf. So relational, I think, might be the powerhouse, because if you're building strong, authentic relationships, that will take you places and put you in rooms beyond your wildest imagination. Whereas positional may get you somewhere, but it might not elevate you. It might actually demote you because you're not making communication with those around you.
That's good. Thank you for running the mic around.
I wasn't here earlier, so my name is Shy.
Hi.
I feel like another one that could be important is expert, with like access to information, because with information and skill, you can do a lot of things with that. You can change stuff with like having the information and skill. So I feel like that can be another important thing up there with like relation. And I feel like a referent can be, but I feel like relation and expert can be like the two important ones.
For sure. You're halfway. Teamwork. I love it.
I'm just trying to formulate a coherent response in a way, but the word that is in my head is responsibility. And the point about education and advocacy and all of them, like, that's what's on my mind, a responsibility to keep listening, keep growing, and not make this a superficial exercise.
Yeah.
Like, whereas what you were sharing about belonging earlier sometimes just becomes a pin, a t-shirt, and nothing deeper. So, thank you.
Just a feeling without doing the necessary work that we have to do to achieve it and to sustain it, right? Y'all are awesome. So now let's talk about, we've explored systems. We have talked about some of the ways that we might have power, the way that we've seen power operate around us. So let's talk about how we can leverage power. And these are just a few things. This is not exhaustive, but a couple of ways that I'm putting forward for us, or that I'm putting forward for us to consider as ways that we can leverage our own power when we're operating within our organizations and our institutions. And the first one is just to recognize the power structures that are at play, right? That's why we started with talking about systems. How do systems work? How does power move within this system? And that is formal and informal. What are the informal networks that are operating? And then after recognizing them, how do we move within them? The first step, and that's why my sister said over here, when we're talking about relational power, especially when we're talking about people from marginalized identities or historically excluded identities, sometimes it's just so powerful when someone comes into an organization for you to tell him, like, or them, look, let me tell you how this works in here, right? This is what they're going to say. This is how it actually is, right? And part of that power move is just understanding how power works, how systems work. Next is to build coalitions, and I've been hearing that in here, right? Who can you work with and alongside to achieve the common goals? Who are your allies, right? And fun fact, we do not have to agree on every single thing for us to be allies. That's how we got into the situation that we're in, right? We don't have to agree on everything, but can we agree on where we're trying to get to? In my job, I really have to sometimes immerse myself into the mindset of the opposition. And one thing I'm constantly coming to that I need to grapple with is like, you know what, really, we're saying we want the same things. We want meritocracy. We want places of employment where people can come in, where they have access to opportunity, where they're able to thrive off of their own hard work and their own merit. Now, what we might disagree on is how to get there. We might disagree on where we are relative to that goal, right? We might disagree on how we arrived at the moment that we're in right now, but we can agree on the goal. And then let's come to the table to talk about how we get there. So build your allies. And part of that is recognizing, if we go back, the power that you have and how it's operating in your system. What areas of influence do you have? What places do you need to build in? Who can you add to your coalition that has a different type of power than you have? Two of my biggest allies in my organization is our managing partner, Mark Wassink, and our Mansfield champion, Dan Ettinger. Mansfield is a year-long process that law firms undergo. We certify that we're achieving these benchmarks to increase diversity in law firm representation. So Dan is the partner that spearheads those efforts alongside me. And those two men are awesome. They're so committed to the work, and they're always joking with me about being old, bald white guys. And every time they say it, I say, and I love that about you. I love that you are an old, bald white guy, because you can go in rooms that I cannot go in as a young-ish. I'm towing the line, but a young-ish Black woman, right? It's all about power sharing, and it's all about coalition building. So yes, bring your lived experience, bring your power and your influence into the coalition so that we can work towards the goal that we're trying to get to together. Next is leveraging strategic visibility. And so this is a little spicy. Part of this is recognizing what are the rooms that you need to be in to get the work done? What rooms do you need to exempt yourself from? Hot take sometimes, especially for people with marginalized identities, people of color, sometimes leveraging strategic visibility is by deleting yourself out of that situation, right? Sometimes you gotta just move on. And that's the biggest power move that you can make. I'm gonna do that over here, right? And also, I just said, okay, hypervisibility without influence is tokenism. And so if we constantly find ourselves in spaces where we are highlighted merely to showcase the diversity in our spaces, but we are not, or people that we're in community with or we're building a coalition with are not invited to the decision-making table, again, maybe sometimes we need to, or say, no, you may not use my image for the diversity report. Or no, we're not taking photos at the ERG event for you to post. That is leveraging strategic visibility. Until we see some change around here, don't use our image. Again, these are my opinions and not the opinions of Warner Norcross and Judd LLP. Hypervisibility without access to decision-making power is tokenism. Yeah, again, not the thoughts of my employer. And then finally, unapologetic advocacy. And Sauda spoke to this so beautifully, right? Understanding how to leverage our voice and to advocate for ourselves. Self-advocacy is not selfish. Sometimes you advocating for yourself creates space for others to advocate for themselves. It breaks down a barrier that then folks who come behind you do not have to encounter on their way taking the same path that you're taking. But how do we speak up? How do we leverage power? How do we advocate for each other? And how do we do that unapologetically, especially in this space, or in this time that we're in? We need a healthy dose of that. No, this work is important. We need to keep doing this work. We don't need to roll that back. These are all things, conversations that we need to be having. What did I miss? What other power moves can you think of, or that you've taken? I saw some amens in the back. We get tired, we done, right? We out of there. Any power moves that you've executed beautifully that you'd like to share? Okay. Well, maybe this will help. Let's work through this scenario. You've been doing great work, but leadership keeps overlooking you for high visibility projects. You know you're qualified, but it seems no one is willing to give you the opportunity. What is your next move? So I got an A, B, and C. Sorry if this is hard to read. I'll read it out loud. How do you engage? Do you, A, take a step back and assess who actually controls these opportunities? So you're doing some self-reflection, like my brother here said. B, strengthen relationships with others who have been overlooked. Push for collective visibility. C, make your work impossible to ignore. D, schedule a meeting to advocate for yourself. Or E, is there some other way? Which one are you choosing? What's the best choice here?
I'm gonna go with D because my mom, she's always told me, like, always speak up for yourself. Because when you do that, that's when people are really listening. And, like, my mom, she's worked in a hospital that's been only predominantly white, so she said that's one thing that she's always done while working in a place like that.
Yeah.
So she said when you make yourself heard, things can change, because if you don't say nothing, nobody knows what to do, or they won't feel how you're feeling. So I would definitely go with D to, like, advocate for myself.
That's right. What they say, closed mouth don't get fed.
So I think the most important first step is definitely A, because you really can't move forward with any of the other options without assessing the situation. Do I have access to the person who controls these opportunities? Are there other people who have been overlooked, or am I the only one? You know, if I do make this big work, am I actually going to get credit for it? So those are things that you have to think about, those things, before you take another step forward. That's just my first thinking.
Yeah, I love that.
All right, you didn't say that it was a multi-answer, but I'm gonna go rogue. So I agree with A, as well as D, but then also B, because you may have to advocate for others in the building who have also tried this, because it might be a storyline there. Why are multiple people being passed up for opportunities
And
like
what do
this?
we have in common?
Yep. Is it skin color? Is it my gender? Is it it could be a multitude of things. But C, we're gonna ignore that option because you can't miss my work if I'm the only person that's in the that looks like me in the room. You know what I'm doing. And then E is the last resort. If none of the above works, then we're gonna find another way, and that might be with another employer. So, multiple answers.
That's right. I agree.
Well, I was going to choose D as well.
Which was to schedule a meeting to advocate for yourself. Yes. They won't know and they'll think it's okay. I'm heavy on that. Sometimes I just need for you to know that I know. I need for you to know that I've peeped, right? And now you on the clock. Are we going to make this right? What's going to happen next? So yeah, I really do think there can be a case that can be made for doing all of these things, maybe not in ABC, et cetera order, but all of these can be utilized effectively in a situation like this. Any other thoughts before we move on? We're almost to the end. Yes, please.
So when it comes to engagement too, and I'm looking at like another way, identifying what may be missing or who is missing in the room or part of that planning process to engage. A lot of times we kind of get confined in who's in our office or who's in our space and who we're comfortable with, but then looking at challenging oneself or challenging outside of the scope of things, of thinking about what may be missing or whose voice or who in the room that could also impact or influence on how to engage as well. So thinking outside the box, thinking who are getting feedback or critical,
Yeah.
all the things that we may not necessarily ask those questions to, or maybe just missing on purpose. So thinking about how do we engage in that way to include in the process of engagement.
So we're inviting someone else to maybe chime in and say like things that you might have missed.
Absolutely.
Okay. I call that the "am I tripping" conversation, where you call your friend and you're like, you know what? Let me run this down to you. Now I need for you to tell me, do I have this right or am I tripping? Totally agree. Any other thoughts? Okay. So just as a recap, and we're pretty much at the end, and y'all have been. Oh yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
for the people online, okay, I was going to say for the people in the back, I'm in the back. Systems aren't necessarily broken. They're doing what they're designed to do.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So keep that in mind while you're thinking through, how to navigate the systems.
Yes. I had a conversation with leadership in my firm. And we were just talking about this in passing, but we were talking about our recruitment efforts and increasing diversity just in our firm and in the legal profession in general. And I was talking about how, the legal profession has been historically very white, very male. It's changing very slowly. And this leader was like, but that wasn't intentional. I said, I almost said sir. I don't want to give away their gender, but sir, it absolutely was intentional. The American Bar Association did not admit Negroes. And that's why we started the National Bar Association. The way that the legal system looks was the result of intentional acts of exclusion. Period. Like, you don't just happen to have a profession that is dominated by one race or one gender. Like, that just doesn't happen. And I need for us to be able to acknowledge that before we even get to the interventions that might change that, to strategic outreaches to, Black and brown undergraduate students to get them to go to law school. Before we're looking at whether the LSAT is, culturally accessible, or if law school is set up to disadvantage, law students of color. Before we even talk about that, I need us to acknowledge that this was intentional so that we can get to where we're trying to go. So absolutely, the systems, they're built like that. And that's why a lot of them have to be heavily tweaked, if not totally dismantled and rebuilt. So just a couple of key takeaways. Again, this is not a training. It's a conversation, and you all have participated in it so beautifully, and I really do thank you all for that, for your engagement, and for talking back. It makes it so much more rich for everyone that's here. But just as a recap, excuse me, systems create access. For me, belonging without power is just not enough. Power is not just about position. Again, there are so many ways to leverage or to exert power. And the best way to do that is in community, collectively, to drive the change that we're trying to see within our systems, within our communities, and ultimately within our nation. And so with that, I thank you so much for your time and your attention and your engagement. And I'm happy to do some Q&A if we'd like to do that. Yeah. My name is Mandice McAllister. Mandice, like Candace, but with an M. Candace is my sister's name. No, she's 4 years younger than me. My mom just thought it was cute. I've been at Warner for, it'll be 7 years in June, which, Lord, I tell people that's like 15 years in millennial years. It's the longest place I've ever worked. It's a good place to work. I started at Warner working in our library doing legal research. And I did that for about 3 years before transitioning into doing full-time DEI work. So my former title was DEI manager. And then at the beginning of this year, I transitioned into an inclusion and retention role. So I'm from Ohio. See, this is hard. Here. And my cousin, no, right? So my family, I was born in Ohio. My parents, I'm telling you, I'm a whole life story. This is on YouTube. It's okay. I was born in Ohio. I was raised by divorced parents, and my dad lived here, and my mom lives in Cincinnati. So a lot of my life was spent up and down 75. And so even though I grew up here, in my heart, I'm from Ohio. But when I go to Ohio, they be like, "You from Michigan?" So it's like I'm from Ohio, but I went to East Kentwood. Yeah. Go Falcons. Yeah. Falcon Pride. Yes.
Sorry, I might have a very specific question.
Sure.
But I know in the beginning you mentioned how we can take this back to our organizations to continue making change. I work for the Ottawa Health Department, and I'm pretty new there, and I do most of the data. This isn't anything new. I came from Chicago. Every time we do anything, like pick a topic, it's stratify by race. Who is the most affected group? And it's always not Hispanic, Black, like on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like 12 years of life lost compared to like the white counterparts. And I'm tasked every so often with providing data, and it's so overwhelming and encompassing to share so many small pieces of information in very short attention span in commissioners or individuals, and especially the people who the individual's role I took over was from Cameroon, and he's mentioned a few times people have come up to him and said, well, what authority do you have to tell us how to live our lives? Not being from here, which is funny. I'm from Connecticut, which is almost probably worse than Ohio, right? Like what?
Don't do it. Don't do it.
It's probably pretty bad. If anybody can name one cool thing about Connecticut, I'd love to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
But snow's everywhere. But even coming from Connecticut, I've never heard those words. What authority do you have to tell us how to live our lives? And like I never heard those words spoken in being serious. So I guess my question, sorry to be long-winded, is like, do you have any advice for taking a lot of information, and parsing it down to share with individuals who are coming from especially now in this climate, and then the climate that Ottawa County has experienced for the past few years. I guess any advice,
Yeah.
I suppose, and I think that it's worthwhile to share with the audience too.
What I would say is focus on one thing, tell a compelling story, and tie it to your values. And so what I mean by focus on one thing is focus on one set of data. And so for me, in my role doing inclusion and retention, I'm only focused right now on attrition. That's it. Who's staying, who's leaving, and why. And then tell a story. So, and you work with data. I'm just now delving into data in my new role. I hate numbers. It goes back to 3rd grade when I was trying to learn them times tables, and it wasn't going well for me. But tell a compelling story. So it's not just putting it on the screen, right? And we see, the disparities of the lost time frame from Black residents to non-Black. Tell a story. Find someone. Here's Billy, and how this data is playing out in his life. His life expectancy was this. He died at this age. His family was impacted in this way. This is the loss, this is what this looks like for our community, right? So for me, law firms love money. This is how many people left the firm. This is how much revenue that means that's taking out of the firm, not only just in the things, what they're billing to our clients, but how much it costs to replace them, right? So tell a compelling story, and then tie it back to your values, right? I don't know what the values are in Ottawa County, or what that would look like. In Warner, it would look, no shade to Ottawa, my dad lives there. But what that would look like at Warner is, this is not true, I'm literally just pulling things out, but we see that our attrition is coming because people lack access to mental health or work-life balance. And we say at our firm that we're a lifestyle firm, and that we want people to have lives outside of work, and we want to support them and their families. And what we're seeing in this data is contrary to what we say that we believe in. How are we going to fix this? And I think that the part that your community member said about, who are you to tell us how to live our lives? It's like, no, we've decided how we want to live our lives. We've decided what our community is supposed to look like, and what it's supposed to feel like, and how people are supposed to thrive here. And what I'm telling you is that there are members in our community that that's not true for. And what are we going to do about it? That's what I would say. Yeah. The thing that I like most about my position, I've always been an equity-minded person, like even when I was a child. Like I remember in the 3rd grade, why is the 3rd grade coming up for me? I need to talk to my therapist about that. But in the 3rd grade, we had to write like a short story, and I wrote a slave narrative. Like a real life slave narrative, like a fictional one, but I wrote a slave narrative. And my teacher was like, he had a meeting with my dad and was like, what is this? And so history and storytelling and how people live their lives has always been like so important to me. I've always had a very strong sense of justice. So I think that the thing that I like the most about my job is being able to like dig into that data and to understand why folks are having some of the outcomes that they're having, and then working to create change. The thing that I dislike the most about my role is just how long it takes. How long it takes. Sometimes you'll be saying something 3 years ago, and then it comes back around, and then you're like, I said that 3 years ago. But what does Martin Luther King say? The moral arc of the universe, or whatever, is long. I don't like the long part.
Any more questions?
I guess this is just a question, about you, and your journey, in school and stuff.
Mhm.
I'm a student here, and I do come across a lot of students that are first generation, that have really big imposter syndrome, including myself.
Yeah.
How do you get over those obstacles, or how did you get through that, throughout your journey?
Over imposter syndrome?
Yes, if you had any, or just feeling like you weren't I do have times where I'm like, I don't know if I could do this, or if
I think that's a thing that you work through like day by day. I remember when I first got, when I moved over to doing full-time DEI work, and one of my first big projects was completing a law firm demographic survey for the ABA. And again, I told y'all I do not like numbers. And this was a lot of numbers, a lot of by hand calculations. And I remember looking at that spreadsheet and being like, they got the wrong girl. I cannot do this job. But I did it. I might not have did it perfectly, but it got done. And so I think that in some ways, like I've heard some folks say like imposter syndrome is not real, and what we're really reacting to is the dominant culture that gives us this messaging that we're not supposed to be in these rooms. And there might be some truth to that, but I think the impact of that is real. Do you know what I mean? And I guess you get through it by the way that you get through everything. You acknowledge it, and you keep moving forward. Don't act like it's not there. But it also helps that the more rooms that you're in, the more you realize that like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know that they're that much smarter than me. It reminds me of Michelle Obama's book, the first one, where she was talking about going away to, an Ivy League school, and she got there and she was like, wait a second, everybody in here is pretty mediocre. So I don't know that that's a good answer, but every room that you're in, you deserve to be in that room, just period. Now, whether or not you want to stay there, whether or not they deserve you, that's a different conversation. But if you're in the room, it's because you're supposed to be in the room. Yeah. Another story that I'll tell about undergrad, and it speaks to access. I was in my last quarter at Ohio State, and again, I had a full tuition scholarship, but it was in-state tuition. So, and I'm from Michigan, right? So there was always a pretty, not too insurmountable, but there was a gap between, what I needed to pay for school and what I had to pay for school. And so literally I was in my last quarter and I wasn't able to register for class because I had a bursar's fee. So I went to the financial aid office, and I'm like, I took the bus to campus. I'd move off campus. Not a smart move. Do not listen to your parents, kids. I took the bus to campus, and I went to the financial aid office, and I was talking to the lady, and I'm like, yeah, I really just I need about $3,000 so I can pay this fee, and so I can register for classes. I have one more quarter. I'm so close to graduation. And she's talking to me. She's like, oh, I see you're from Michigan. I'm like, yeah. I told her the story I told y'all, and she's like, yeah. Have you ever thought about just moving back to Michigan? I mean, you could transfer to another school, and that way you won't have to pay so much. And I was like, did she really just? This was a white lady, too. I hate to say that, but she was white. And I didn't know how to respond to that. Like, I came here to ask you for help to how to stay in school. You're the financial aid office. And her advice to me was, just go back to Michigan, transfer somewhere else. And so I remember leaving there, and I felt really defeated. So I went home to my apartment. I'm like, man, I still can't register for school. What am I going to do? And then the next day I said, well, I'm just going to go back and see if I can talk to somebody else. Because that was really the only choice. I didn't have $3,000. My family didn't have $3,000. So my only choice was to go to the financial aid. I don't know if they was going to give me a loan or a scholarship, something, right, to get me through school. And so I went back, and I was looking around like, is that lady still here? And I had I hate to really make this about race. I'm sure there's another lovely white lady who could have helped me, but the sister that helped me when I went back, and I told her, look, I have 1/4 left. I have to be able to register for classes. I graduate this quarter. And she said, oh, we gonna get you this money. And that's exactly what she did. Scholarships, she found me some money. And I actually ended up sharing with her as I was leaving, like, yeah, your colleague, her advice was just to pack it up and move back to Michigan. And she said, what? Oh, no. You deserve to be here. You're so close. You're almost there. I'm going to get you what you need so that you can finish it out. And so I don't know why I told that story, but it just kind of ties into what we've been talking about, access, representation, and how that advocacy can mean so much to the people that we're in community with.
I actually like that you told that story, and I think it like ties back into the power thing with the knowing people with information and skill and having the relation. Because when I started going here, which I've been going here since 2023, but I graduated high school last year from EK.
Oh.
And when I first came here, I was going for free, and then when it was getting time to go into school, I was also having a problem with financial aid, and I couldn't register for classes. And when I went to financial aid office, a white lady told me that she said, you're not gonna be able to come. You gotta come in the winter, or you're gonna have to pay out of pocket. And I was defeated. I told my mom, I'm like, I don't even think I can go. I wasn't even gonna go. And then she told me to go ask for more. And a black lady, Miss Clay, I love her so much. She helped me. She helped me with scholarships. She got me a scholarship, and I ended up going here for free. And she paid for everything. So, and that also plays in with the syndrome, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Because I had that too, because I'm a first generation. No one in my family went to college besides me, so I had it really bad too. And when that happened, I think I like officially thought like college wasn't gonna be for me when that first happened.
And look at you, here, thriving. College is for you, baby, and whatever else you decide that you want to do.
I can ask a question.
Yeah.
So my question stems around, I guess we talked about using our voice, using relationships, using education as our power. So in those things, kind of utilizing all of them, how do we speak to systems, or how do we speak to folks who can, make change, or some of the stories about financial aid, and could that be a systemic issue or a systemic problem as it relates to someone telling you, oh, go back to Michigan, or you need to start in a specific time frame? So as folks who are hearing these stories, I guess what advice or what would you say, how can we change that, or what can we do to make sure that we don't have folks leaving our institutions or our companies or our organizations because of one human? Like, how do we combat that, or what do we do to save lives?
I think that it's really easy to do in organizations to equate things to one-offs. It's like, oh, that was that one lady, or that's that one guy. Yeah, he's terrible, but just stay away from him. And I think that when we're looking at systems, we have to have data. And I think it goes back to what our brother was saying in the middle about sifting through that data. And so for me, when I see things, when I hear things, when an attorney comes to my office and they say, this is what I'm experiencing, my first clue is to be like, oh, I wonder if other people are, and that is data collection. So just to kind of double down on the example of financial aid, go back and look at who is being awarded what. Are we seeing a disparity? And this can translate to any system. I'm just using is there any disparity between who is awarded financial aid, who takes out loans? Is there satisfaction surveys that we can administer to students when they come into the financial aid office that will give us a gauge on how the individuals within this office are serving our student population? But you have to have data. And then once you have the data that shows a pattern, don't write off the pattern, right? Because that's another thing that we like to do. It's like, oh no, because this was the situation that happened, and she, cussed the lady out, and that's why she didn't give her a scholarship, and this person did this, and this person. Nope, let's look at the pattern, and then let's see what interventions we can implement to change that system. And it could be some of the things that we talked about. But systems work, it requires data, and that's both quantitative and qualitative. But if you don't have any data, then you can't discern what the pattern is. And if you can't discern what the pattern is, then you can't disrupt it.
What advice do you have for advocates of DEI work in the current climate who feel defeated?
Ooh, take a vacation. Because it's been how many weeks? It feels like 6 months.
Yeah.
I was just talking to a colleague about that. It feels like 6 months.
I think it's less than 60 days.
And we have 4 years. We have 4 years that he leave office, right? So yeah, my first piece of advice, especially for those who are feeling defeated, is the advice that my mentor, Dr. Sandra Upton, shout out to her, Life Goals, always tells me is to make sure that your self-care is super tight. Whatever that looks like for you, if it's taking vacation, if it's totally unplugging, how are you taking care of yourself? Especially for, DEI work is very heavily women. It's also, I feel like, I don't have the data to support this, it's also very heavily Black women. And we are not setting ourselves on fire to keep nobody warm anymore, right? So yes, do the work, take care of yourself first. And then to combat despair, to get in community. I think it really helps when there are people that you can talk with about the struggles that you're going through in your work, that you can get sound advice from, that can be a sounding board, somebody to tell you like, yeah, that sucks, but we're going to get through it. So self-care and community, and yeah, those are the 2 biggest ones. The really biggest one is self-care. Take care of yourself. Y'all are so great. This has been so fun.
We have just a couple more minutes.
So kind of circling back to like one of your previous slides, you were talking about like what power we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was gonna say it, but then I was like, maybe I'll wait. But I really thought about like calling people in, But I've also am someone who is not, I don't want to say like confrontational, because if you're trying to call someone in, it's like you're not trying to confront them necessarily. So in my head, it's a good idea, but I guess in practice, I wouldn't really know how to go about doing that.
Calling somebody in?
Yeah.
Can you explain to everyone what the difference between calling someone in and calling someone out?
Yeah, so if you're calling someone out, it's like, oh, you did this thing and I didn't like it. And that's kind of that, right?
Yeah.
Like I called you out, I put you on the spot. But when you're calling someone in, it's like you're trying to kind of go deeper of like this, you said this thing and I didn't like it and here's why. And like, how do we make it better?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I think calling someone in requires you to have a relationship and to be in community, though. There has to be the mutual respect, the openness of communication for you to be able to be comfortable enough to have that frank conversation with them. I also think that there are times when calling somebody out is needed, especially when the discretion or the indiscretion or the the mess up, I don't even know what else to call it, was public. And it publicly goes against your values. And especially if there is no community, there is no sense of safety. If I don't have your phone number to call you, you know what I mean? Like, I think there are instances where you might have to utilize one over the other. But for sure, if you are in community where there is an environment of mutual respect and collaboration, I think that the best tool is to call someone in and to have that conversation. And just exactly what you said, like, hey, it might not even be something that they said, something that they did, or just, I want to have this conversation. This is how that landed on me. And I know that you value our relationship enough so that we can have this conversation. So I think that if you're able to do that with grace and with care, that's definitely a power, in my opinion, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other final thoughts, comments, questions? Great transition.
Thank you,
We'd like to
friends.
thank Mandice one more time. Round of applause for you all as well, and our online viewers. So as we come to a close, again, I want to thank you all for joining us. Again, thank you, Mandice, for being our expert in the room amongst the conversation that you provoked and engaged. We greatly appreciate it. Definitely will have me reflecting and using some of the things that you shared ongoing as I continue this work here on campus as well with GRCC stakeholders. So, again, I mentioned we have a QR code for your feedback for tonight's session. If you can please take a moment to scan the code and provide us with your thoughts, reflections, or just overall feedback on tonight's session. Again, we do take into consideration your voice, what you share with us into our future sessions and events. So it is greatly appreciated. It goes back to that data piece that was talked about as well. So this is our way of making sure that we collect our data to keep things like this going. All right. I also want to mention that our last diversity lecture series will be next week. Quick turnaround. Wow. We in the fourth quarter here. We really are. So we will be completely virtual. Join us for our campus community read. We have been engaging in lots of conversations, discussions, and events around braiding sweetgrass. So we will also have our author join us next week virtually to kind of discuss, engage in further conversations around these different topics that we've been engaging in all academic year. March 20th, 5:30, virtual. You can register still. Please do if you have the time. And we'll see you online. If you need a parking pass, come see me. I'll make it rain, for sure. Absolutely. Come see me. All right, thank you so much. Have a good evening.